I am Bryce of the Cinder Archive, and this is Chapter 11, The Vault Beneath the Vow. Geary gave them a partner, and nothing else. A word, not a name, offered across a workshop table with more honesty than he'd managed in 9 chapters, and still, by any fair measure, not enough of it. He asked for trust he admitted he hadn't fully earned, and the party gave it to him anyway, conditionally. The way you hand a stranger the reins of a horse, you're still deciding whether to like. But trust conditional is not trust blind, and 5 people who've spent a week learning to work as one do not, as a rule, stop pulling a thread simply because the man who tied the knot asked them nicely not to. Somewhere in the city, on paper, in a hall built to remember what other halls would rather forget, there is a name Geary wouldn't give them. They intend to go find it themselves, and they intend, for now, to do it quietly, without asking his permission for a search he has every reason to discourage. The Open Hand Exchange's records hall does not announce itself the way the rest of the exchange does. No brass fanfare, no echoing atrium, no clerks calling out lot numbers to a crowd of hopeful petitioners. It sits 2 floors below the public concourse, reached by a stair that narrows with every landing until it feels less like descending into a building and more like descending into the building's memory, and the room it opens onto is vast in a way that has nothing to do with grandeur. Shelving runs floor to ceiling and ranks deep enough to lose a person in, each rank fitted with a brass filing drum the height of a man. Every drum divided into hundreds of hand-labeled slots that click and rotate on a system of chains and counterweights nobody currently employed fully understands anymore. Dust hangs in the shafts of gray light let down through high, narrow windows, unbothered by movement, as though the room has an agreement with its own air that nothing here should be disturbed faster than paperwork can be filed. It is, Senna thinks, walking the entrance aisle with her boots unnaturally loud, against stone worn smooth by a century of quieter footsteps, the strangest kind of neutral ground she's ever stood on. The Open Hand Exchange prides itself, at street level, on being the one place in Ether Glen where every hall's business gets weighed by the same scale. No favorites, no politics, just paper and precedent. Down here, 2 floors below that promise, the paper itself seems to have accumulated a kind of gravity all its own. Decades of cross-hall disputes and joint ventures and quietly settled grievances pressed flat and filed away where they can be found again, if anyone ever thinks to look. It ought to feel reassuring. Instead, it feels like standing inside an enormous, patient machine built for a single purpose. Remembering that has been running so long and so faithfully it no longer occurs to anyone to ask whether it might occasionally be made to forget on purpose. It smells like every argument anyone's ever had, twice, in writing. Orsa says, low, more to herself than to the rest of them, and does not look reassured by the observation. She has kept a half-step behind the others since the stair, the particular reluctance of someone who spends her working life under open sky, and finds close, windowless permanence its own kind of discomfort, however orderly. It smells like old paper and machine oil, Bram says, which is what an archive smells like. That's what I said. Senna's eyes are on the drums rather than the argument, tracking the slow mechanical click of one rotating somewhere in the middle distance, a chain drawing taut, a counterweight settling. It's beautiful in its way, she offers, which earns her a look from Orsa that suggests beauty was not remotely the word Orsa had been reaching for. Tamsin trails a step behind the others, one hand not quite touching the nearest drum's brass casing, close enough to feel the cool of it without committing to contact. She has been quiet since they arrived at the exchange proper. Quieter still on the stairs down. The particular quiet, Wick has noticed without saying anything about it, that settles over her whenever they get close to anything. Gear right adjacent, though whether that's the archive's subject matter or simply the archive's proximity to machinery in general is not a question anyone has thought to ask her directly, and she has not volunteered an answer. She keeps her sleeve pulled a half-inch lower than usual over her wrist, a habit none of them have remarked on, though Senna, walking beside her, has noticed it more than once without saying so. At the far end of the entrance aisle, behind a long, scarred counter stacked with intake ledgers 3 and 4 deep, an archivist looks up at the sound of 5 sets of footsteps arriving at once, and does not look pleased about it. He has the specific bearing of a man who long ago made peace with being the least glamorous fixture in a building otherwise built to impress, and who has converted that peace into something close to armor. Every question anticipated, every argument pre-rebutted, every excuse already filed under a heading marked "heard before." The records hall processes requests during posted hours, he says, before anyone has said a word to him, in the flat, preloaded tone of a man who has delivered this exact sentence more times than he can count and has stopped bothering to had it set He is perhaps 50, ink-stained at the cuffs, with the specific weariness of someone who has spent 30 years being the only obstacle between the public and a system he did not design and cannot meaningfully improve. A small brass plate on the counter reads K. Mott, Senior Archivist. Posted hours are on the door. You are not within them. We notice the door, Wick says. Easy, already leaning one forearm on the counter with the loose-limbed confidence of a man settling in for a conversation he has already decided will go his way. Very handsome door. Excellent hours listed on it, too. Very reasonable hours for an archive. I imagine most people who come down here don't even notice they've missed them. Most people who come down here read the door. I read the door. I simply also read the room, Archivist Mott, and the room tells me you're the only person on this floor at the moment, which means the posted hours are less a rule and more a request. A polite fiction we're both free to be reasonable about. Wick's smile doesn't waver, doesn't push, stays exactly at the register of a man asking a small favor rather than demanding a large one. We're looking for a joint patent filing. Cross Hall, filed some years back, gear right side. Should be a simple pull, if the indexing's what I think it is. Cross Hall filings require a sponsoring hall's written request, or exchange authorization, or a name, Wick says, and slides a folded chit across the counter. The kind of chit, Senna will realize a beat later, that reads as an exchange registration marker, the same one filed when the party first accepted Geary's mission back at Chapter 1's converging point. Still valid, still on record. We're already contracted through this office. Hall tier coins, sterlings posting, all filed and stamped. I'm not asking you to bend a rule, Archivist. I'm asking you to recognize one that already applies to us. Mott examines the chit for a long moment. Long enough that Brahm shifts his weight, the particular stillness of a man deciding whether patience is still the correct tool for this particular door, and something in his weathered face shifts, not quite warmth, but the specific, grudging respect one professional occasionally extends to another who has correctly identified the actual shape of a problem. Sterling, Mott says, turning the chit over once, reading the stamp on its reverse with the flat, practiced eye of a man who has processed 10,000 of these and remembers, unhappily, exactly which name attached to this one. That posting's caused more foot traffic through this floor in the last month than I've had in the previous 3 put together. You're the 4th party this week asking after something Sterling adjacent. The 4th? Senna asks, before she can help it. Creditors, mostly. A journalist once, who I sent away without so much as a filing year to work from, and good riddance. Mott's mouth thins, not quite a smile. Sterling's always been popular reading down here, one way or another. Genius draws attention. Genius that pays badly and lives loudly draws twice as much? He sets the chit down, unhurried, and folds his ink-stained hands atop the counter. That gets you into the general stacks, doesn't get you into anything sealed. Joint patents from Gearwright specifically run through a secondary index. Different drums, different floor. I'll need the filing year, or a name, or I genuinely can't help you. Chit or no chit. We don't have a name, Senna says, before she can stop herself and regrets it instantly at the flicker of professional caution that crosses Mott's face. The recalibration of a man realizing the polished request in front of him is thinner than it first appeared. We have an approximate window, Wick corrects, smooth, not missing a beat, though the look he gives Senna afterward carries just the faintest edge of, I had that handled. 15-20 years back, give or take. Sterling's name attached, alongside one other filer. That's what we've got. I'm told the general stacks index cross-references by principal name regardless of sealed status. The seal just restricts what's inside the folder, not whether the folder's existence gets acknowledged. Is that still accurate, or has the exchange changed its own indexing convention since the last time I was down here? Mott's eyebrows lift, very slightly, the look of a man recalculating, again, just how much this particular young man actually knows about the room he's standing in. It's still accurate, he admits. You've done this before, once or twice. Velvet Ledger? Once or twice, Wick says again, with exactly the same mild, uncommittal warmth. And Mott, after a pause that stretches just long enough to be its own kind of answer, huffs something that isn't quite a laugh and reaches under the counter for a ring of small brass keys. You people, he says, not unkindly, always know exactly enough to make my life difficult and not quite enough to make it worse than that. I'll give you this much for free, seeing as we're being honest with each other. Whatever you're hoping to find down there, I'd manage your expectations. Diorite joint filings from that era are thinner than people expect. Most of what actually mattered about Sterling's early work never got formally filed at all. The man built things faster than the paperwork could keep up with, by every account I've ever processed. You may find less than you're hoping for. We'll take whatever's there, Wick says. Deeper stacks, Mott says, sliding the keys across. Follow the green-painted rail. Don't touch the drums that aren't marked for cross-reference. They're keyed to hall staff only, and they will jam if handled wrong, and I will not be the one explaining to my supervisor why 5 strangers broke a drum system older than the Crown's current dynasty. You have until the hour bell. After that I lock the stair whether you're finished or not. More than fair, Wick says, already turning, already moving, and the others fall in behind him with the particular ease of a party that has, without much discussion, decided this is his room to lead in. The passage back from the counter runs deeper into the hall than the entrance aisle suggested, the ceiling dropping by degrees, the windows thinning to the occasional narrow slot set high in the stone, until the gray daylight from the concourse above gives way almost entirely to close, lamplit brass and shadow. The green-painted rail Mott mentioned turns out to be an actual iron rail, waist-height, running the length of a much narrower corridor between shelving that presses close on both sides. The kind of space Senna thinks that would be genuinely difficult to fight in, if it ever came to that, though nothing about the hushed, dust-thick quiet of the place suggests it ever would. Bram's hand trails the rail as they walk, testing its give out of old habit, the reflexive assessment of a man who has spent enough years in tighter, more dangerous corridors that his body checks the exits in any new one without being asked to. Orsa walks the corridor with her jaw set, eyes moving across the ranked shelving the way they'd move across unfamiliar terrain, cataloging, not admiring. In the Wildroot Conclave, she says, to no one in particular, when something needs remembering, it's kept in a person. An elder, a keeper, someone who can be asked a question and answer it or refuse to, and either way you know exactly who's choosing what you get to know. This, she gestures at the walls of drums receding into lamplit shadow ahead of them, this is memory with nobody accountable for it. 1,000 decisions about what to keep and what to lose, made by clerks nobody living can name, and somehow that's supposed to be more trustworthy than a person who'd at least have to look you in the eye while they decided. It's supposed to be more trustworthy because no single person can be bribed, threatened, or grown old and forgetful, Wick says, not unkindly, from a few steps ahead. That's the theory, anyway. It's a fine theory until someone finds the seam in it, Orsa says, and doesn't sound reassured. We're about to find out whether today's the day somebody already has. The deeper stacks are colder, the light thinner. The drums here labeled in a denser, more cryptic shorthand that means nothing to 4/5 of the party and, evidently, quite a lot to Wick. He moves along the green-painted rail with the unhurried attention of a man reading a familiar language in an unfamiliar accent, fingers trailing the edges of drum after drum, pausing, moving on, pausing again. There's none of the tavern easy performance he gave Mott at the counter. No charm to spend down here. Nothing to negotiate. Just the quiet, focused competence of someone doing a job he happens to be genuinely, unshowily good at, and the rest of the party notices the shift without remarking on it, the way you notice a familiar person's voice drop half a register when they stop performing for an audience and start actually working. You're not just looking for the name, Bram observes, watching him work. You're looking for something specific about how the name's filed. Both, honestly. Wick stops at a drum near the rail's end, cranks the handle a quarter turn, and watches a column of labeled slots rotate past with the patient focus of a man counting something under his breath. Cross-hall joint filings get double indexed, once under the principal filer, once under whoever co-signed. If Sterling filed something jointly with someone, there should be 2 threads leading to the same folder. It doesn't matter which one gets found first. I'm just looking for wherever those 2 threads cross. You earned this doing what, exactly? Orsa asks, not quite an accusation, more genuine curiosity dressed as one. Fencing, Wick says, without looking up from the drum. You'd be amazed how much of moving stolen goods through legitimate channels comes down to understanding how paperwork gets filed, cross-referenced, and quietly lost. Half my trade's less about the goods than about knowing exactly which ledger won't ask the wrong question, if you present the right chit at the right counter. This, he taps the drum's brass casing, isn't so different from a fence's own backroom bookkeeping. Just older and slower and considerably better funded. That's a strange thing to be good at. It's a very useful thing to be good at, which is a different question from whether it's a strange one. A ghost of his usual grin surfaces and vanishes again. Quick. Ask me again after tonight whether it was worth learning, and if only one thread exists, or suppresses. If the other filer never had standing to co-sign anything in the first place. Wick's hand stills on the drum just for a moment. Then that's its own kind of answer, he says, and doesn't elaborate, and keeps turning the crank. Thompson drifts closer to the drum he's working, close enough now to actually rest 2 fingers against the brass, and goes very still. Anything? Senna asks, careful, watching her. Cold, Thompson says after a moment, and there's something almost like relief in how she says it. The plain, ordinary cold of old metal in an unheated room, nothing more. Just cold, it's fine. I don't know why I keep doing that. She pulls her hand back before anyone can ask her to explain further, and the moment passes the way these moments have started, quietly, to pass, noticed, filed away, not pressed. Wick works another 10 minutes in near silence, cranking, pausing, occasionally muttering a filing code under his breath like a man checking his own math, and the party settles into the particular restless patience of people watching someone else do a job they can't help with. Bram inspects the rail joints with the idle attention of a man who likes to know how a mechanism works, even when it isn't his mechanism to fix, testing a bracket here, a hinge there, murmuring something approving about the craftsmanship under his breath that nobody else quite catches. Orsa keeps her arms crossed and her back half turned to the nearest wall of shelving, as though declining to fully trust a room built entirely from other people's paper, her eyes tracking the slow, patient rotation of drums in the middle distance, the way a hunter tracks something that hasn't decided yet whether it's prey. You've done this a great many times, Senna says at one point, quiet, watching Wick's hands move with the easy, unconscious precision of long habit. More than I'd probably want written down anywhere official, Wick agrees, cheerfully unbothered by the observation. Fortunately, this particular archive doesn't index that. Should it? Depends how much you enjoy irony. He glances up at her, something almost fond in it, before returning his attention to the drum. Most of what I learned finding other people's secrets, I learned so I'd never have to file any of my own where someone like Mock could put a hand on them. Feels strange, using it for someone else's mystery for once. Not unwelcome, just strange. Senna doesn't have a ready answer for that, and lets the silence stand instead, which Wick, for once, seems to appreciate more than a reply would have. Here, Wick says at last, quiet, and something in his voice pulls the whole party toward him at once. It's at exactly that moment, Wick's fingers resting on a slot he hasn't yet pulled, the party gathering in around him, that a 5th set of footsteps arise at the head of the aisle, brisk, formal, entirely unlike the archivist's tired shuffle. Senna turns first, some instinct older than the mission recognizing the rhythm of it before her eyes confirm the uniform. The messenger is young. Younger than Senna herself, she thinks, watching him close the distance, dressed in ashen vow, gray-trimmed in the order's pale gold at collar and cuff, the fabric still holding the crisp, unworn newness of someone recently commissioned into the messenger corps rather than field duty proper. He carries a sealed letter held flat in both hands at chest height, the particular formality of someone who has been told, specifically and probably more than once, to deliver this and nothing else, and to deliver it well. Paladin Brack, he says, finding her in the group without hesitation. Someone at the Vow clearly briefed him well enough to know exactly what she looks like, down to the specific unit of the party she'd be traveling with. "I've been asked to find you. It's urgent." Senna takes the letter, with a small automatic dip of her head, old habit surfacing before thought does, and breaks the wax seal, the Vow's sigil, pressed clean and official, with the same care she'd give it in the hall itself. She reads in silence for a moment, and the rest of the party watches her face do something complicated, attention sharpening, then souring, then settling into a carefully held neutrality that fools no one who spent the last week learning her face. "Everything all right?" Bram asks when the silence has gone on a beat too long. "It's Ashen Thou business," Senna says, folding the letter along its original crease with more precision than strictly necessary, a habit, Bram will think later, of hands needing something exact to do, while the rest of her sorts out what it means. There's a formal review underway. Conduct concerns regarding one of the Evil Wing paladins, Cale Ashworth. I'm being asked to give testimony. I served alongside him for 2 seasons, before the posting. They want a first-hand account of his temperament, back before. She stops, chooses the next words with visible care. Before whatever this review is actually about. "The Vow has an evil wing," Tamsin says, half a question in the tone of someone encountering a fact that sits oddly against the word vow itself. "The Vow has all 3, Senna says, and there's an old worn patience in how she says it, the patience of someone who has explained this exact thing to outsiders more times than she'd like. Order isn't the same as alignment. A paladin swears the oath, protection, restraint, service, regardless of which wing they stand in. Good, evil, neutral. The oath doesn't care which one you are, it cares whether you keep it." A muscle works briefly at the corner of her jaw. "Most days that arrangement works better than people from other halls expect. We train together, we mess together, we answer the same summons. An evil wing paladin isn't a contradiction to us the way it sounds like one to you. It's simply someone who's sworn the same protection, the same restraint, under a different understanding of what justice is owed to whom, and how harshly. Some days the arrangement works, some days it doesn't. This is apparently one of the days it doesn't. You served with him, Orsa says. Was he keeping it? The oath? I thought so. 2 seasons ago, I'd have said so without hesitating. Senna's fingers tighten, just slightly, around the folded letter. He was hard, and he ran a harder line than my own wing keeps, and I didn't always agree with the ledger of who deserved what from him. But hard isn't the same as broken. I never saw him take more than the oath allows, whatever he believed the oath allowed." She exhales, something between the laugh and the sigh. "I don't know what's changed since." That's rather the entire problem with being asked for a testimony about someone's temperament. You're only ever qualified to speak for the version of them you actually witnessed, and people change out from under old testimony all the time. I'd hate to give the review board a picture of a man that's 2 years out of date and have it matter more than it should. "What happens if the review finds against him?" Tamsin asks. "It depends how far it's gone. Formal censure if it's minor, suspension from field duty if it's not. In the worst case, Senna hesitates, and there's something in the hesitation that reads, to Bram at least, as a woman choosing not to finish a sentence, rather than one who doesn't know how it ends. In the worst case, the Vow can strip the oath entirely. It doesn't happen often. When it does, it's not a punishment anyone in the hall takes lightly, on either wing. Losing the oath isn't like losing a rank, it's losing the thing that made you a paladin in the first place." Bram says nothing to that, but something in his face has gone quiet and a little distant, and Senna, glancing at him, wonders, not for the first time, though she still doesn't know the shape of what she's wondering about, whether some old weight of his own has just been set down next to hers, unspoken for a moment, before he lets it go again. The messenger shifts, polite but plainly still waiting for a formal answer, and Senna turns back to him with the practiced, careful diplomacy of someone managing 2 competing obligations at once. "Tell the review board I received this and I understand its urgency," she says. "Tell them I'm currently engaged in hall-sanctioned contract work and will present myself as soon as I'm able to step away cleanly. Days, not weeks. I won't have them think I'm avoiding it. I only need to see this piece of what we're doing here through to a stopping point first." The messenger nods, satisfied enough, and withdraws back down the aisle at the same brisk formal pace he arrived with, and Senna stands for a moment with the folded letter still in hand, her attention visibly split between the archive in front of her and a hall 2 miles away that has just handed her a different, colder kind of investigation to carry alongside this one. She tucks the letter inside her coat with the same care she gave the seal, smooths the front of it flat with one palm as though the gesture might settle something in her chest along with the fabric, and turns back to the others with an expression that's already working to look more composed than she currently feels. "You don't have to stay," Bram offers, quiet, genuine. "If this needs you sooner, it needs me soon." "Not this exact hour?" Senna squares her shoulders in the specific way she squares them before returning her attention to something difficult, and looks back toward Wick, still crouched at the open drum. "What did you find?" Wick doesn't answer right away. He's gone very still over the drum's open slot, one hand resting flat against its brass casing, and there's something in the line of his shoulders that reads, to Bram at least, as a man who has found exactly what he was looking for and isn't entirely certain he wanted to. What Wick found is a folder. It's thinner than any of them expected, a single patent record, its cover sheet stiff with age, the exchange's registration stamp faded to a pale ghost of itself in one corner. Wick lifts it free of the drum with the careful, reverent handling of a man who has spent an entire chapter demonstrating that he takes this part of the job seriously, and sets it on the reading shelf, built into the rail's end. And the party gathers around it the way people gather around something they already suspect will change the shape of the conversation they've been having since Chapter 9. "Joint patent," Wick reads aloud, tracing the header with one finger. "Filed under Gearite sponsorship. Principal filer, Garrick Sterling." He pauses. Co-filer's name is... He stops. The party leans in and sees at the same moment he does exactly why he stopped. Where the co-filer's name should sit, a clean line on the cover sheet, formatted precisely like the Space Geary's own name occupies just above it. There is instead a rectangle of missing ink, not crossed out, not blotted, scraped clean. The parchment beneath it thinned and slightly rough where something has removed the writing entire rather than merely obscuring it, leaving a hole in the record shaped exactly like the information it once held. Nobody speaks for a moment. The particular silence that follows is the silence of 5 people simultaneously recalculating what kind of discovery they've just made. "That's not age," Brom says finally low. "Ink doesn't fade like that, that's a hole." "It's deliberate," Tamsin says, quiet, and there's something in her voice that's gone slightly distant, the tone she gets when a thing in front of her is asking something of her that she can't quite name. She doesn't reach to touch the page. None of them do. As if by unspoken agreement, the scraped rectangle has earned itself a small, careful distance, but her eyes stay fixed on it with an intensity that has nothing to do with simple curiosity. Someone did this on purpose. Recently, I think, the edges are too clean for it to have happened a long time ago. Parchment ages at the cut, same as everywhere else. This edge is still sharp. "How recently?" Senna asks. "I couldn't tell you a season, if that's what you're asking. Just recently enough that whoever did it wasn't worried about someone noticing the difference between an old scrape and a new one. Which means either they didn't think anyone would come looking this hard, or they didn't much care someone did." Tamsin's fingers curl slightly at her side, an old, half-unconscious habit Senna has noticed before without naming it. It feels wrong. Not the resonance kind of wrong. Just wrong the way it's wrong to watch someone erase a person's name off a headstone. Deliberate and a little bit cruel, even if nobody meant it cruelly. Orsa's arms are crossed tighter now, her attention less on the page and more on the room around it, the towering shelves, the clicking drums, the whole vast, orderly machine of institutional memory they're currently standing inside of. "A room built to remember everything," she says, "and someone with enough reach to make it forget one specific thing, cleanly, recently, and get away with it. That's not a locked door, Bram." "A locked door, I understand. A locked door tells you plainly that something's being kept from you, and you can at least respect the honesty of that. This is a room that's been taught to lie, and it did it so well none of the people running it even noticed." She looks briefly, almost accusingly, at the towering ranks of drums surrounding them. "I didn't like this place walking in. I like it considerably less now, knowing it can be made to say less than it actually knows and never once show the seam." "The exchange didn't do this," Wick says, carefully. "Not as an institution. The exchange doesn't have a reason to." Neutral ground doesn't play favorites. That's the entire premise it runs on. The whole reason every hall in this city agrees to trust it with their disputes in the first place. Somebody used the exchange's own system against itself, from the inside, with enough skill that the system itself never flagged the wound. That's a very different kind of somebody than a corrupt archivist skimming coin off the top. Could Mott have? Senna starts. No. Wick's answer comes fast enough to be its own kind of confidence. Not his hand. I've watched him work a counter for 20 minutes. The man follows every rule he's got memorized to the letter, out of genuine, bone-deep professional pride. The kind of pride that doesn't survive being caught doing something this dishonest to his own archive. Whoever did this either didn't go through him at all, or went through someone well above him. He turns the cover sheet slightly toward the gray window light, angling it, studying the scraped rectangle with the narrow, focused attention of a man reading a very specific kind of handwriting, which is actually the more interesting question. Not who, how. He's quiet for a long moment, turning the page this way and that, and the rest of the party waits, because something in the set of his shoulders says he's arriving at an answer he doesn't especially want to be the one holding. This technique, Wick says finally, the scraping, the depth of it, the way the edge is beveled instead of cut straight down, that's not a knife, and it's not a common eraser block trick. That's a very specific method, taught to a very small number of people, and taught deliberately quietly, because the whole point of a redaction this clean is that nobody's supposed to be able to identify it afterward. He turns the page a final time, holding it flat now, angled so the gray light rakes across the scraped surface and throws its shallow contours into sharper relief. I've seen it exactly twice before, both times on records that were never supposed to see daylight again, and both times it traced back to the same small handful of people, high clerks, the kind who get trusted with the exchange's actual seals rather than just its stamps. There aren't more than a handful of hands in this city trained to make a redaction this clean. You're certain? Orsa says. Not doubting him, testing the weight of the claim the way she'd test the give of a branch before trusting it with her weight. As certain as I get about anything that isn't nailed down and notarized. The bevel angle's distinctive. Most people scraping ink use a flat blade and go straight down because it's faster and nobody's ever taught them a reason to do otherwise. This is angled, shallow at the edges, deeper in the center, a technique built specifically so the scrape reads, to a casual eye, as ordinary wear rather than deliberate removal. It's slow work. It's careful work. And it's the kind of care that only gets taught to people who are trusted not to make mistakes with something this sensitive. His finger hovers over the scraped rectangle without quite touching it, as though the page itself has become something worth being careful around. And the last time I saw this exact bevel, on this exact kind of parchment stock, the clerk who made it worked directly under the gear-right hallmaster. The words settle into the cold archive air and stay there. That doesn't mean the hallmaster knew, Senna says quickly, into the silence. Not quite a question, more a hope stated aloud in the hope that saying it will make it truer. No, Wick agrees, gentler than his usual register, as though he can hear exactly how much she needs that possibility to still be open. It doesn't mean that. Not yet. Clerks answer to a great many people above them, and a hallmaster's office generates enough paperwork in a season that not every seal gets personally reviewed by the person whose name sits at the top of the letterhead. It means someone with access to the hallmaster's own clerks decided this record needed to disappear, and had the standing to make it happen cleanly enough that nobody down here even flagged it as unusual. That's the floor of what we know. The ceiling could be a great deal higher, or it could stop exactly where I just said it does. I genuinely don't know which yet, and I'd rather say that plainly than let any of us start assuming the worst version just because it's the more dramatic one. Bram looks at the redacted line for a long moment, arms folded, jaw set in the particular way that means he's already filing this alongside every other loose thread the party has been quietly gathering since Chapter 9. The locked workshop door, the color-matched maker's mark, a partner Geary would only half admit to. Whoever it is, he says, they had the reach to touch something inside the gear-right hallmaster's own office and make it disappear without so much as a ripple down here. That's not a small thing to be able to do. Whatever this partner actually was, somebody with real institutional weight still cares, years later, that we don't find out who. Then we open it, he adds. Not a question either. Nobody argues. Senna folds her arms against the archives cold, her thoughts visibly split. 3 ways now. The redacted page in front of her, the sealed letter still warm against her ribs beneath her coat, and whatever quiet unease has been building in her since Chapter 9 about exactly how much trust Geary has actually earned. We don't tell him about this yet, she says finally, half a question herself. Not until we know more. We don't tell him anything yet, Wick agrees. Not the folder, not the redaction, not the hallmaster's clerk. Not until we understand what we're actually holding. He closes the folder carefully, the scraped rectangle of missing ink disappearing from view, but not somehow from the room's attention. Whoever scraped this clean thought they'd finish the job. I'd rather they kept thinking that a little while longer. Above them, somewhere in the archive's higher reaches, a brass drum clicks over to its next slot. Patient, indifferent, keeping its unbothered record of everything the city has ever bothered to write down. Everything except, apparently, whichever single name someone once thought this particular room could be trusted to forget. The 5 of them stand a moment longer in the cold, lamp-thin light, none of them quite ready yet to be the one who says out loud what they're all now thinking, that whoever reaches into a hallmaster's own office and scrapes a name clean off a public record and does it well enough that a room built for exactly this kind of memory never even notices the wound, is not the kind of person a party of 5, however capable, particularly wants to be quietly investigating without knowing, yet whose attention they might be inviting.